July of 1997. And part of the reason we're here today in this beautiful facility, having Olympic trials at an indoor venue, is due to Chuck's masterminding. His first trials were 2000 in Indianapolis at the Nat. What a great event. And he just recognized that it could be bigger and better to grow the sport. And that started in motion why we're here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Chuck for some introductory comments, and then, of course, we'll take questions. And once again, just raise your hand, and we'll capture the question on the microphone. So, Chuck, take it away.
Thanks, Scott. You use the word mastermind. I feel like there's some sort of evil force behind things. I think I would just start by telling you what a honor or privilege it is for all of us who are associated with USA Swimming to be associated with this event. And it was an incredible swim meet from 2000 backwards. And I think what's happened since then is that it's become a great show for our sport. This is our Super Bowl week. And we've approached it that way. We've had two goals from the start. Number one was to, and this is always forefront of our mind, to have a flawless competitive environment for our athletes to compete in. And that's always the default position. What's in the best interest of the athletes? And it's one of the reasons why coming back to Omaha now for the third time is so beneficial, is that the athletes who've been here before and their coaches, they know where everything is for the most part. They know where the hotel is, they know where they're going to have their meals, they know where the warm-up pool is. There's no surprises, and it takes all of that stress. And if you go to a new venue, it adds a whole level of stress for athletes and coaches. So that's one of the main reasons why returning to Omaha is so important to us, because it benefits the athletes and the coaches. And then our second goal is to really showcase the sport. And again, athletes are front and center with their performances, but we've been able to, I think, build an experience around that, an atmosphere that has this become a legitimate major sporting event. I think we've got a spot on the calendar. Other events now pay attention to us. The media pays attention to us, and we really appreciate that. And we talk a lot about the number of athletes we have. And realistically, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but realistically, the number of athletes who have a legitimate chance of making the Olympic team is probably fewer than the number of athletes that are actually here. That's about as safe as it's kind of, but if we pick 45 to 50 athletes, if 45 to 50 athletes qualify to make the Olympic team, and there are 1,750 athletes here, that's 1,700 athletes that are going to go home. Now, some of those athletes will be a little bit older, they might retire, but the vast majority of those athletes are going home having had an experience that they will want to have again. And so this event becomes a motivating force for them. And it has a ripple effect because of all the hometown attention that they get. And I was looking the other day at a chart that showed the number of athletes in each age group. And we know now that because of the money and other things that have come into the sport, that athletes are staying in it longer. Athletes are now in their late 20s. But the biggest spot on that chart, that curve, is in the 16, 17, 18-year-old range. And so there are hundreds of athletes here. I don't know what the actual number is, so I'll just say there are hundreds of athletes here who are in that pipeline and who are probably here for the first time and might have an overwhelming experience, but they're also in that group, there may be that breakout, and that breakout athlete. And we tell the story about swimming about Katie Ledecky, who you just had the opportunity to speak with. And not too many people in Colorado Springs knew who Katie Ledecky was 6, 7, 8 months out. And she like blossomed like a flower at trials and then had an experience at the Olympic Games, which was monumental. And so somewhere out there is maybe that next Katie Ledecky. And that's part of the fun of the trials, is seeing who's going to start to rise to the top and who will be that next generation of athletes. So I think I've rambled enough. I'm happy to talk about the trials as it's evolved over the years, but we could not be more proud of it as an event, and we hope to be able to continue to have this event grow and expand, but again, with the priority always being back on what's best for the athletes.
Go Karen first, and then we'll go over there.
Is there at all a point where you could have too much of a good thing, where having 161 people in an event is a tipping point?
Yes, there is. And I think we have to be very sensitive to that. There is a fair amount of pressure, might not be the right word, but a fair amount of talk that, well, perhaps, we should move the trials around, as a for instance. And the analogy that I've been using is that there are a bunch of guys in green jackets in Augusta, Georgia, who know exactly what they have, and they protect that event with ferocity. And I look at this event the same way. It's evolved to a point where we really want to protect it. And it doesn't mean we don't want to make improvements, and we have a number of improvements this year. But a lot of those improvements are away from the pool. We expanded the Aqua Zone, we have USA Swimming House and other things that are happening that improving the experience for spectators and for family members and for our fans, and so that's a good thing. But Karen, could this meet grow to the point where we have, 2,000, 3,000 competitors? I think that's too much. We actually set a goal, and we've missed it now like 3 times in a row. But we think the right number is about 1,200 to 1,400 athletes. And what happens is, with swimmers, you put a mark down and then they chase after it. And no matter how aggressive we think we are with setting those time standards, we got kids who meet the mark. And so we'll do it again in 2020. We'll try to set time standards that will get 1,200 to 1,400 athletes qualifying, and I'm willing to bet whatever mark we set, we're going to end up with 1,600 to 1,800 athletes qualifying. But I don't see us growing the number beyond where we are now. I think we're right at about the edge of where we want to be in terms of the number of athletes.
Emily Zink with KMTV Action 3 News. I know a lot of us here in Omaha want to know, this is the 3rd time the trials have been here. What are the deciding factors to bring it back a 4th time in 2020?
The single biggest factor related to Omaha staying as our home for our trials right now with us is the timing. And we look to our coaches to give us some indication of what's the right time between the end of trials and the start of the Olympic Games. And that number is around 30 days. Could be a little less, could be a little more, but around 30 days. That they feel they have the opportunity, and the athletes have the opportunity to go back to hard work and to repeat at the Olympic Games. And again, the goal for our top athletes, the goal of trials is to make the team, but the ultimate goal is to be on the podium at the Olympic Games. And so those athletes have to peak for the trials because they become so competitive, and then they got to go back to hard work and repeat. And so we have a situation where the Tokyo dates, Rio starts August 5, Tokyo starts, I think, somewhere around July 20th, 25th, 24th. So it's almost 2 weeks earlier. So that would mean if we stay to form, we'd want to push our trials back 2 weeks. Boom, we're right on top of the College World Series. Now that's not to say the two events can't coexist. we're coexisting today and tomorrow. So, but we don't, it's not ideal. It's not ideal. And I think it's probably less ideal for the NCAA and for some of the folks here in Omaha than it is for us. But that's the single biggest factor that we're trying to wrestle with now. And that's a big one. So we've taken the position relative to 2020 is that let's get through these 2016 trials. Let's get this one in the books. And then let's talk to our coaches, see how they feel the trials went this time, because we're a little longer. The athletes in the past have had to go straight into training camp from trials, and now we're letting the athletes go home for a few days. So the coaches might come to the conclusion that wasn't a good idea. So we need to get through the trials, through Rio, see what our coaches feel, and then we'll get into discussions with FINA and with Omaha about what do we do. And with the U.S. Olympic Committee, they're a part of this, and NBC, they're a part of it. There's a lot of significant players that are at the table that we've got to involve in the discussion. Long-winded answer, but maybe you can pull some things out of that.
Next question. We'll go Pat, then Paul.
Chuck, a couple of your athletes that were in here commented, on, I guess, the disappointment that with some of the stories that have come out about doping in various sports and various countries. One of whom, Elizabeth Beisel, said she was not confident that the swimming competition will be clean in Rio. What are your thoughts on where things stand in swimming worldwide from a doping perspective?
Well, first of all, this is a question that's coming from a guy who was a conflict of interest. Pat's got 2 kids who are swimming here in the trials. That's pretty cool. But that conflict of interest aside, Pat, this comes up every single Olympic Games. We have a discussion about doping. And I think there are more positive things happening now than I've seen happen in a long time. The top 10 athletes in each event are now being tested at least 5 to 7 times in and out of competition from January through to the games. And that's a commitment that was in part a result of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency and its CEO, Travis USADA, putting pressure, talking with the leaders at FINA. USA Swimming was represented at that meeting. I think we certainly would want to take credit for that, but I think we're in the sidecar with the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency and their fight for clean sport. And Travis Tigert is absolutely a champion. And he is probably the most clear-eyed thinker and clear-throated speaker on the subject of anti-doping in the world today. And we think he's doing an incredible job, and we support him 100%. And that doesn't make everybody happy. We understand that. But we have an obligation, I believe, to fight for clean sport. I think we do what we can. It's a monumental effort. We'll never win it because the cheaters are always a step ahead. But again, I've seen more positive in this go around than I've seen, and I've been at every Olympic Games since '92, than I've seen in the past. And I think we've got to give a little bit of credit to FINA. I know a lot of people have issues with FINA, but I think FINA has been very responsive. And I believe they're very committed, and they're taking actions to back that up. At the end of the day, the IOC plays a huge role in this, and we've seen a little bit of back and forth just over in the last few days. I thought WADA's position on backing the IAAF decision was a massive decision. I mean, that was quite a day. And it was good to see initially the IOC back that up, and I hope they would stick with that. So again, we don't want our athletes to talk about this a whole lot. We want them focused on their performance. But again, it's an issue that comes up at every single Olympic Games, and it always will. But I feel better now that I have in a long time. But it's not, you know, the fight goes on. The fight goes on.
Paul?
Hey, Chuck, how you doing? Oh, right here. Kind of a follow-up to that. Is there anything else you would like to see done in that personally, or at least that y'all have talked about, you know, a step that can be taken? Obviously, seems a big flaw is that countries are sort of allowed to run these on their own, and we see if they're not committed to the rules, you know, swimmers don't, or athletes don't get suspended necessarily for positive tests, or tests are covered up. What would you like to, first on the doping, is there anything that you would like to see done, even if it can't be done before Rio, but
Yep.
going forward?
The number one thing that we would like to see done, and I personally like to see done, because you put it in that context, is to have more resources be made available for investigative services. And it's one of the, I think, significant shortcomings right now is that when there is information that could lead to finding an athlete or a group of athletes or even a state-sponsored program, we want to be able to share that information and also have others be able to share that information with their domestic anti-doping agency and ultimately with WADA to conduct investigations. And so I think that's the number one thing. More resources need to go to that, especially internationally. You know, USADA has put more resources to it. It's still not enough, and I think Travis Tigert would agree with that. But that would be the number one thing.
And this is totally unrelated. The whole on swimsuits, and we know what happened in the late, you know, up to 2008, 2009, and then it was scaled back, and we have the rules that are pretty set with textile. Do you see any changes coming in that realm in turn? I mean, I know the companies would love to go back to getting a lot of publicity for NASA suits and, you know, and being able to unveil cutting-edge technology. Do you sense any that there is any pressure or a move going forward to maybe let a little more technology back into it, or what's your position on that?
Well, USA Swimming's position on that is we would not like to see that. I mean, it's not that we're opposed to science, but we want the performances of athletes to be gauged on what they're on hard work and on what they're able to accomplish without technological aids, specifically swimsuits. I mean, there's not a whole lot you could, you know, it's caps, goggles, and suits. And, you know, the swimming suit manufacturers, you know, are always pushing the envelope, and that's understandable. And then they become sponsors of governing bodies, and then governing bodies, you know, I mean, this is what happens in Washington, D.C., right, with our government. And so we've taken a hard position. We would love to see our you know, the guys swimming in, you know, nothing below the knees and nothing above the waist, and we want to keep it there. You know, and where the women are today, we think that's where we'd like to stay. So then you start looking at the fabric of the suit and what that's made of, and we don't want that fabric to be something that provides an aid. So again, we want the performance results based on the work that the athletes do, not on technological enhancement.
Karen? Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's there, but I think one of the advantages of taking a firm position is people know where we stand, so they don't pressure us a whole lot. So we're more concerned about the pressure that comes to others, and in particular to our international federation, FINA, and the position they take. And one of the things that FINA has to take into account is that if the suit manufacturers are coming out with new products, and many athletes want to use those products, well, there may be, there are 208 nations within FINA. How many of those nations are in a position where they can afford to buy that new technology for their team. So there's really a case to be made that technology is a disadvantage to many of the FINA member nations. So again, we're always going to look for the arguments to keep the suit situation the way it is today. And thankfully in Rio, we aren't facing that issue. The attention seems to be much more on the whole drug situation in Rio.
Chuck, Chuck, back here. You have a country in Russia where the state-sponsored doping, it's pretty clear it cuts across more than just track and field. You also have Russian swimmers who have failed drug tests in the last 4 years. How strong is the will among USA Swimming and FINA to hold the Russian swimmers accountable and perhaps keep them out of Rio?
Well, I think our will is very strong. And I kind of go back to the comments I made about the need for more investigative resources. There's nothing that we can say or do right now that's going to impact what's going to happen with Russian or Chinese swimmers. That's in the, FINA has to deal with that. WADA has to deal with that. The doping agencies in those countries have to be part of that. And that's an issue because, we don't have anti-doping agencies as strong as USADA in many other countries around the world. And so when a situation arises in which there is reason to believe there might be something going on, this is when investigation needs to occur. And so we are 100% of the position that where investigations need to occur, they should occur. I'm sorry, Karen, I can't hear you.
The list of failed tests in and of itself is not strong enough.
It's certainly strong enough to be the reason to have investigations take place. And I think I would leave it there. That's,
All right, if we have no further questions, we'll take a break and then
Nothing about Zika?
Ryan Lochte will come on up. Ryan, do you have a question? Thank you, Chuck.
That's Ryan about Zika.